So I took him to the ER, and we were in the ER all night until 9 in the morning. And then a few days later, he woke up vomiting blood or coughing blood. I don't know whether it was coughing or vomiting from after swallowing so much of it that threw a bunch of it up. It looked like a murder scene in the bathroom. It was so much. And almost had to call an ambulance because if the bleeding doesn't stop, he needs to see an ENT. But, I wasn't prepared for it in terms of having bags ready to go. And he's throwing up blood, and I'm thinking I gotta get stuff ready to go. So, but thankfully it clotted and it stopped bleeding, and we didn't have that issue again. But yeah, it was eventful for sure. But thankfully he's doing much better. He seems really healthy, and seems like his normal self. So we're thankful for that. Yeah, really thankful for doctors and modern medicine and hospitals close by, but it brings up one of the things that we'll talk about later, is cooperation. Because, in the medical field, because somebody has the 2 extra letters in front of their name, there's still a lot of things that they don't know and they can't do. Just even the same one area, asking the doctor about certain things that's going on with him. And then we talked to a pulmonologist today, and I talked about the exact same thing, and she had a very different answer. But she was an expert in her field. And so, I'll get more into it later, but if you think about it, that each of the doctors have a place in serving the care of people, but not all of them can do everything. There's just too much. But we'll get into that. So we're talking about 2 of the articles in the Statement of Faith, stewardship and cooperation. Do you have yours with you? Good. So we're talking about stewardship first. When you think of the word stewardship, what do you think of? Budget? Yeah. Money, giving. What else? Yeah. Hey, don't be cheating. You're looking it up? Oh, okay. What else do you think of? Yeah. Yeah. That's good. In 1896, a man named Judson Van Deventer, he was really struggling with what he should do with his life, and he was wrestling with whether or not he should pursue a career in art. He was an artist and a musician. Or should he focus just on ministry and just focus on evangelism? And he was wrestling with these 2 decisions. And while he was in a meeting with some people in Ohio, that he actually wrote a song called All to Jesus I Surrender. Because he was wrestling with these decisions and what should he do with his life and all of these things. So then he was meditating on this and came to this resolution and turned it to the song that, my life, whatever it is that you want me to do, God, I surrender. And so in a sense, Judson is wrestling with the fact that his life was given by God and that he's responsible for what he does with his life in terms of how he is given something, but now he is responsible for the choices he makes with it. And so like this with stewardship, and we'll talk about, is that since what God gives us, like Roger said, what God gives us, then we have a responsibility. So then we have to ask, first of all, what has God given us? We need to think about what has God given us, and then how are we responsible for it? And in terms of responsibilities, what are those responsibilities, and how do we make good choices about it? So let's read the statement first, then we can talk about it more. So God is the source of all blessings, temporal and spiritual. All that we have and are, we owe to him. Christians have a spiritual debtorship to the whole world. a holy trusteeship in the gospel, and a binding stewardship in their possessions. They are therefore under obligation to serve him with their time, talents, and material possessions, and should recognize all these as entrusted to them to use for the glory of God and for helping others. According to the Scriptures, Christians should contribute of their means cheerfully, regularly, systematically, proportionately, and liberally for the advancement of the Redeemer's cause on earth. Okay. So, if we talk about stewardship and we think about what God has given us, what are some things that God has given us? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's be more specific. What are things that you have personally that you would attribute to being from God? Family, home. What else? Health, talents. Good. Salvation. Yeah. Yeah. Your money, absolutely. Good. Yeah. And so, the very beginning, in terms of actual life, who created us? God created us. So, even our lives, who's responsible? Like we said, salvation. What about, we said jobs, homes, cars? Deuteronomy 8:18 says this, "But remember that the Lord your God gives you the power to gain wealth in order to confirm his covenant he swore to your ancestors as it is to this day." So even our economic situation in this world, we can just give glory to God. And we can also give credit to God that we happen to be born in this society. Many people are not born in such a economically strong country and a democracy and have the freedoms that we have. What about talents? So we attribute it to God, but do we sometimes say, yes, it's all from God, but then really take the time to actually pinpoint something that we have and actually think and make the connection that this was from God? I can give credit to God for this. Because if we wrestle with the two compatible things that we can't really fully understand, but we must accept because the Scripture teaches it, is that God is both sovereign and humans are responsible. So even our job experiences or our life experiences, and even for good or bad, even those things that God, even the bad stuff, God redeems and seeks to use those things. You know, many of us have had some bad experiences in our life, but yet God redeems those things and uses those so that we can help others. Like Paul, what did he say? He was at such a point of despair that he kind of wished that he would just die. They were having such a hard time. But then he experienced what? Do you remember in 2 Corinthians? He experienced God's comfort. And he said, why did he experience that comfort? So that he can also be a comfort to others. And so God uses those things. So we contribute even our experiences, our talents, our education, whatever that might be, to God as the source of all things, both temporal and spiritual. Temporal meaning things that are happening in the physical world that we can see. But there's spiritual blessings that God has given us as well. In Genesis 49:25-25 says, "By the God of your father, who helps you, and by the Almighty who blesses you with blessings of the heavens above," spiritual blessings, blessings of the deep that lies below, and blessings of the breast and the womb, meaning that there is nothing under heaven that we can't attribute that's a blessing from God. Anything that we have that we can be thankful for, we can give credit to God for. Okay, so since we attribute all our things that we have, both temporal and spiritual, and we can attribute it to God, how does that affect us? Yeah. Good. Yeah. Humble. Yeah. That's right. It's kind of like we've been given credit. In a sense, of course, we're not earning God's blessing. God gives it by grace. But yet, in a sense, we do owe something of responsibility in what we do with those things in order to honor God and to build his kingdom. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think sometimes we have a hard time wrestling in our culture that when we're given a gift, we have a thought that, well, it was a gift, and in order for it to be a gift, that means I can't give you anything in return. Otherwise, we are doing a transaction. But that is actually a very American idea or very Western idea. And if you talk to somebody who's been in Japan and you ask them about getting a gift, it becomes an ongoing cycle. You almost don't want somebody to give you a gift in Japan because you are obligated to also reciprocate and give a gift. And they'll give a gift, and you give a gift. And it's about building relationships. In Papua New Guinea, where we work, people often just bring a gift, whether it's some bananas from their garden or something like that, or some kind of food that they brought. And although they're not necessarily wanting me to give them money, they don't want money, and they don't really want me to trade and give them some other food. But what they're doing is they're communicating that I want you to reciprocate through a relationship. I want you to know that we welcome you, and that I also want you to be my friend. And so we reciprocate either by gifts or simply by presence or by service or gratitude. And so I think that we have a hard time that, okay, well, God's given me this blessing, so it's just for me, and I can't give anything back. Otherwise, I'm earning it somehow or I'm diminishing it. But instead, I think that in the first century as well, that giving a gift, in the sense, always was expected that something would be in return, such as honor and gratitude, praise. Or even, if they asked you to do something to help them with something, you would gladly go and do that, because they have given you a blessing. They have given you grace. That's what charis in that context comes from. And that's where doxa, glory, also comes into context. So the next line says that Christians have a spiritual debtorship to the whole world, a holy trusteeship in the gospel, and a binding stewardship in their possessions. So I personally don't like the phrasing of all of this in terms of a debtorship to the world. I think that there's a debtorship. Like, what do you think about that? What do you think about that phrase? Does that sound... Maybe I'm thinking of it in a different way, but maybe it sounds okay to you. That's right. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's hard when they convoluted everything about the world has. It makes it tough when you really sit there and look at it.
Yeah, there's a lot of convoluting. I spoke with a homeless man the other day, and he was telling me how all creation is God. And of course that's not true, and I addressed that. But that's a common thought. That's an ancient thought. It's been around for a long time.
That's what God said. You're supposed to see God in creation. Is that not what you're talking
No, I think what he's saying is that God, since God created the creation is actually directly like divine,
about? Oh, okay. I see.
not necessarily.
And that's
No. So what you're saying though is that creation is like a signpost or an arrow
right.
pointing to its creator.
I mean, when I see,
yeah.
like, we went to SeaWorld the other day, and when I see those shamans jumping out of the water and doing all those tricks, it hits my heart, It's kind of like, man, how can people not believe,
Yeah.
Because it's just so amazing.
Yeah. And all of that is so amazing. There's so many amazing things in creation.
Sure.
Yeah. You go into a shop where the furniture's made by hand, or you automatically are thinking, wow, this person's really talented. Yeah. So, but I personally don't like the phrasing, have a spiritual debtorship to the world. So whoever's putting this together, I would like to ask them why they chose this phrasing. Because I don't like the phrasing that it's necessarily debtorship to the world. Because I feel in debt to God, not to the world. But as being in debt to God, I feel responsible in terms of He is committed to the world and its redemption. And because of that, I also feel committed to the world and its redemption. If that's what they mean by that, then I totally agree with that. But, it's that loyalty to God that influences. That's why I struggle with sometimes our commitment to the church based on, its attractional value or its size or what programs it has and all these kinds of things. Or, I don't like this person who's preaching. If you don't like a church because it's heretical, then that makes sense. But because you just think you see that it's broken or that it's, not meeting up to your standards, it's never going to. But the commitment to the church that I think needs to be grounded in is the fact that Christ is committed to his church. And then that is why we can be committed to the church, no matter how ugly or broken it may be. But similarly with the world and our stewardship, as it's not so much that we just love, yes, we love the world in a sense, but that is based on our love for God. You know what I mean? So if we just love the world but we left out God, well, the world's going to really disappoint us. But when it's a love for God that fuels that, then that's what fuels our love for God, for the world, and that fuels our willingness to, or our commitment to its redemption. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's more about you. Or about me, excuse me.
Yeah.
You, but me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what it seems like if you take that out of the equation, it's all about me.
Yeah. Yeah. I like thinking of vertical versus horizontal. Vertical is our relationship with God, and horizontal is our relationship with the world around us. And vertical relationship is what's going to fuel the horizontal. But if you take the vertical out and it's just horizontal, then like Roger said, it's just temporal. Or like you said, Ryan, it's just really about me. I'm looking horizontally to be satisfied or fulfilled or whatever it might be. But also that horizontal plane, because they're so connected, that the way that we view or interact on the horizontal plane reflects what is going on vertically. And what I mean by that is when you see dysfunction in a family or a church or a relationship or whatever that might be, that's horizontal dysfunction. But it also reflects something vertical that has gone array. Because if we have our things right with God, it's going to affect the way we relate to other people and to our world, which affects our stewardship. And so the next point, the next section is that the Christians who have this stewardship says they're under obligation to serve him, God, with their time, talents, and material possessions, and should recognize all these as entrusted to them to use for the glory of God and for helping others. According to the scriptures, Christians should contribute of their means cheerfully, regularly, systematically, proportionately, and liberally for the advancement of the Redeemer's cause on earth. So sometimes we have a dichotomy that's a false dichotomy. It's secular and sacred. So sometimes we think there are certain activities, certain days of the week, whatever it might be, that those are sacred. Sunday morning, devotion time, Wednesday night Bible study, those kinds of things. And then the rest of the time is secular time. It's just non-spiritual. It's non-religious. But there's a huge gap there because we have to ask ourselves, is that the way God sees it? And is that the way the rest of the world actually sees it? Because, in fact, I would argue that lights up something to see that maybe something's amiss is that most of the world actually sees the complete connection that everything is spiritual and everything is physical and that they are interacting all the time. And so, if Paul says in Romans 12 that offer yourselves as a living sacrifice, I don't think he's attributing that to on Sunday mornings or only when you go on a mission trip or only when you're in a Bible study or only in the mornings or the evenings or whenever you're having your devotional time. No, he's saying that your life is supposed to be a living offering to God. And so I think we need to wrestle with, as a culture and as individuals, that the secular sacred dichotomy that we have created is really a hindrance to ourselves and to our church and to our ministries and even to our time and our relationship with the Lord. So have you ever had the thought of me time? It's me time. It's my downtime. It's my free time. And I use the phrasing, it's my free time or my downtime and all those things. I don't think those phrasing's wrong. But I was recently just from, I think it was even before this, maybe thinking about this, but I really wrestled with, and I thought, is it really free? Is it really my time? And I've had to wrestle with that and ask the Lord, this is really still God's time. And God, what would you want me doing with my downtime? And I don't say that to put like guilt or shame or that you should be only reading your Bible or you should only be witnessing to people and not put that on you, but just have open hands and open hearts to the Lord, recognizing that time is actually, I'm stewarding that time. And God, how would you have me steward that time? Am I stewarding it well by just relaxing and watching a movie? Or is there something else that God would have me do with that time? And so I think when we consider stewardship, we need to go beyond money, and we need to go beyond just simply our possessions. But let's even think through our time, our energy, our years. How many years do we have on this life, on this earth? And thinking through that. Okay. And lastly, before we go into stewardship, cooperation, I have to think through too, and we're thinking about stewardship. So let's say we get stewardship nailed down to a T. We have a systematic program. We've figured out exactly from the time we wake, the time we go up, we're stewarding our time right, our possessions, our talents, our whether it's our job, it's our car, whatever it might be, and we've nailed it down that we're stewarding it perfectly. What could go wrong? There's a huge piece of the puzzle that would be missing if we didn't consider it. It's our heart's motives behind it. Where's our heart behind it? So we can check all our boxes, but if we have the wrong heart behind it, it doesn't amount to much You see how God talks to the Israelites who are doing all their sacrifices and rituals and everything, but yet their hearts are in another place, secretly, worshiping other gods. God has no appreciation for their worship when their hearts are divided. And so, like, Jesus tells his disciples, or a big group that he's teaching at the time, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father in heaven. So whenever you give to the poor, don't sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be applauded by people. Truly, I tell you, they have their reward. But when you give to the poor, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So as we think about stewardship and we wrestle with those things, it's not so much that God's after us checking boxes, but checking hearts as well. Because spiritual and physical are completely intertwined. So how we steward is also a reflection of our hearts. Where our hearts are, there, where our treasure is, there our hearts will be also. Right? Okay, so let me ask you this. So what's the basis for stewarding our time, money, energy, and talents? What's the basis for it, for stewarding? Okay. My teaching wasn't very clear. That's okay. Yeah. Very good. I did not make that I should have made that more clear. It's that God is the source of all of these things. And so because he has given us these things, we are responsible for how we use it in a way that honors him. Okay, let's go on to cooperation before I run out of time. All right. Christ's people should, as occasion requires, organize such associations and conventions as may best secure cooperation for the great objects of the kingdom of God. Such organizations have no authority over one another or over the churches. They are voluntary and advisory bodies designed to elicit, combine, and direct the energies of our people in the most effective manner. So when we talked about God being the basis for our stewardship in terms of him being the source of all things and that we want to honor him. But when we think about cooperation and we're talking about these things going on, I think it's important also to recognize what is the basis for our cooperation. And the first section of this makes it sound like the reason. When I say basis, I mean, what's the main reason for thinking about and being cooperative people? And the basis to me, when I read that, it sounds like, although it does say it's for the great objects of the kingdom of God. But it almost could sound like it's for productivity, to be a more productive and effective people. And I'd say that would be a good outcome of our cooperation, is to be more productive and be more effective. But when we think about the basis, it's not productivity, it's actually theology. Because we have one God, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, and so we are united by that. And not only that, but when we think about the unity, our church relationships are actually Trinitarian in the sense that they're influenced by the Trinity, because God is in perfect harmony with himself, Father, Son, and Spirit. And they work together. They're in real harmony with one another. And the way that they work and have different roles, it's in perfect harmony. And so that actually should be the basis. That is the basis of why we seek unity. That's why we are called to be united to one another, because God himself is not divided. And so we should also reflect that. So, who can tell me when the Southern Baptist Convention was started? Yeah. Oh, you're close. 1845. Yeah, so churches have been joining together. And although with us, like in the Southern Baptist Convention, the churches are autonomous, and we join together because we are united in our commitment and our convictions, and we believe that we can do more together than apart. And so the Southern Baptist Convention started in 1845, but Baptists have actually been creating associations and conventions since the 1600s. So it was not a new thing. And in fact, one of the big parts of why the SBC exists, Southern Baptist Convention, is because we can pool our resources together. And the cooperative program that we've talked about a lot actually started because of a failed campaign trying to raise money. In 1919, they were trying to raise money. They called it the $75 million campaign, trying to get the SBC out of debt and be able to fund its home and foreign mission boards, now called North American Mission Board and International Mission Board. So they're trying to raise $75 million in a few years, but they actually came up $34 million short. So they didn't hit their goal. But what they realized, though, is that when they put their money together, this is what happened. So through this campaign, the Home Mission Board, was what it was called at the time, rose $6.6 million. But in the last 74 years combined, it had raised $8 million. And then the Foreign Mission Board received $11.6 million compared to $12.5 million in the previous years combined. So, although the campaign failed, they realized that if we just work on pooling our resources, we have a lot more that we can do than what we could have done before. And so that's when they started the cooperative program in 1925. One of the benefits of being part of the Southern Baptist Convention is, honestly, the amount of resources because of the cooperative program and the things that we are part of. We are able to fund church planting, missionaries, disaster relief, the seminary training. There's the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission that works with a lot of ethical realms within the public sphere. And among those things, the International Mission Board, as far as I last checked, Pastor Michael can correct me on this, but I believe the IMB sends more missionaries than any other organization in the world.
3,500 right now active.
And as far as I know, the U.S. is still sending more missionaries than anywhere else. South Korea might be close, though. Yeah? South Korea sends more missionaries? Yeah. And there's amazing tools for college and high school, for college students or grads. SBC will basically pay for them to go overseas. The convention will pay for them to go overseas because they want to recruit either lifelong missionaries or mission-minded lay leaders. And so if you have a college student in your realm that's a believer, a solid believer, tell them about some of the IMB's programs because they are amazing. You can go for 4 months or you can go for 2 years. And our tithes that we give goes to the cooperative program and helps fund that so that we can do that. Something that would cost tens of thousands of dollars will either cost a small fraction of that or nothing at all. Okay. Any thoughts or questions so far? Okay. So the next section is members of the New Testament churches should cooperate with one another in carrying forward the missionary, educational, and benevolent ministries for the extension of Christ's kingdom. Christian unity in the New Testament sense is spiritual harmony and voluntary cooperation for common ends by various groups of Christ's people. Okay. So we talked about, a few weeks ago, we talked about when Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 12, he gives an illustration about Christ's church being the body and has many members of the body, and everybody works together in order to accomplish the purposes. The eye needs a hand, the foot needs a body or leg, all those kinds of things. We understand the illustration. But that doesn't apply just to the local church. It applies to the global church, which is why within a local church, we partner with, we work together on things within the local church, but then we also partner with those that are of like mind, and that we get to be a part of their ministries and things that they are doing. So what are some of the ways that Liberty has partnered with other ministries? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So we got one with Wycliffe. Yeah. Any other ones? Yeah, Men's Helm. What, did you say one? No? Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then what about, do we start partnering with Kenya? The radio ministry in Kenya, right? Yeah. 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 No. With Manny's son?
Oh, no. That's not, by saying no, that's not an opposition. It's just we currently don't.
No, I can't give it to everybody, right? Can't help everybody. I was just asking.
It's a fair question.
First things that we're partnering with because there's a need.
Yeah.
And it's like we have the men's home.
Yeah.
Those guys, bless their soul, God is restored.
Yeah.
And it's a good ministry.
It is a great ministry.
Salvage people and help them get on the right track.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen it when you found it in the verse where you're just up the street and all beat up house and everything was a mess and pictures are trying to do what I could do, but just he needed us to come alongside. We had to pray, figure out some ways to make things happen. Just now they're solid.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's a great ministry. Yeah, the Men's Home is a great ministry, partnering with Sahara. Yeah, there's so many wonderful things that simply, the reason why we partner with all these things is what? For the spread of the gospel. And because we also can't do everything. We simply can't, and honestly, I don't think it's part of God's plan that each individual church tries to do as much as they can, but it works so much better when we partner together. Like Paul, when he was going to visit, in 1 Corinthians, he talks about a collection. And so he talks about, part of the reason why we have something like conventions and other things is because if we are in isolation, then the church is potentially weaker or more vulnerable. And it could be more, weaker in terms of just lack of resources. Could be more vulnerable in the sense that it's maybe doesn't have enough accountability or just even good resources of teaching, being able to send people to seminaries at a much better rate because the cooperative program helps pay for that. Like Southern Baptist seminaries, if you're part of the Southern Baptist Convention, your tuition is half of what it normally is. You get an automatic 50% discount, which makes the cost quite a bit lower.
Scott, just to pause
Sir,
there.
pause.
On the screen, you may be able to see, we talked about the cooperative program, and the line item SBC Executive Committee, 100% of that line item goes directly into this. When the budget line item of CSBC, that money, about 80% of it stays in the California Southern Baptist Convention, and about 20% goes directly into the CP. So when we restructured our budget, we restructured it so that 100% goes into this, and that's how, you see how it's broken down. 73% to the IMB, 2.9% to the ERLC, and they just called up. You can follow Brent just caught up some politicians or something. Well, 73% goes to IMB and NAM. 50.4. I know that number because we're able to say more than half goes to the world missions. Yeah, 50.4. And then 22.79 to NAM, North American Mission Board. There's also offerings, the Lottie Moon Christmas and the Annie Armstrong Easter offering that fund the other portions, the remaining portions of the North American Mission Board and IMB's budget. And then they have donors that fund certain items that wouldn't be, we would not want to pay for out of the CP, so like administrative costs. So they actually have donors who say, we're going to pay, the cost of software so that it's not coming out of missions fund. We're not choosing between Microsoft Office or missions. And then you see 22%, when he started talking about the seminaries going to the 22% of our, I think it's 18.6 we just approved, and then 1.65 for the RLC. That's how it's broken down.
Thanks, Michael.
I think it's helpful. We talk about CP. I'm
Yeah.
Baptist by doctrine. I'm Southern Baptist because of that.
Yeah.
Like, the way we do missions, there's nobody else. Maybe the CMA is close, but it's too small.
Okay, and the last section. Cooperation is desirable between the various Christian denominations when the end to be attained is itself justified, and when such cooperation involves no violation of conscience or compromise of loyalty to Christ and His Word as revealed in the New Testament. 1 Corinthians is a really good passage for a lot of this because, the key text or the key theme, I think the biggest theme that runs through 1 Corinthians is divisions within the church. And one of the things that Paul brings up is he's talking about how there's rivalries in the church, and he says, he calls them out. One of you says, I belong to Paul, or I belong to Apollos, or I belong to Cephas, or I belong to Christ. And he says, is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in Paul's name? And so this text isn't speaking about, okay, well, then that means all denominations are problematic because they're... No, that's not the sense. There's nothing wrong necessarily with denominations. Sometimes historically, what happened historically in terms of how they responded to the situation, we would say was not godly or God-honoring. But the main point is that they were united because they are first Christians. So they're first Christians, secondary Baptists. So to be Baptist is great. But the banner that we hold, how we raise one flag higher than the other, we always raise the American flag than any other flag. Okay, the banner of Christ is always above every other banner. That comes first. And so that becomes our basis for unity, is in the gospel. And so when we talk about cooperation with other denominations, I think one of the main points that it brings up is not that the end in itself is justified, because if we left it there, it would be easy to justify it in our own sense of what we think is a good cause, but that this cooperation involves no violation of conscience or compromise of loyalty to Christ and His Word as revealed in the New Testament. So those two things are very important. And so, it's one of those things that Christians will disagree on. They'll disagree on what level of cooperation is okay and what level of cooperation is not, and who it's okay to do things with. And a lot of those things often really depends on context and what it is that you're proposing to cooperate on. And I'll give an example. In Gayavi, we're working on Bible translation. You know that. But because we're working on the Bible and we're working on making sure that that is the as accurate as it can be, as clear as it can be, and natural, those are our three pillars when we talk about translation. But one of the other ones is acceptable. In terms of what that means is that you don't want them to think that this is just a Baptist translation or just an Anglican translation or whatever it might be. So what we want is we want all leaders to be involved because that gives credence to its acceptability so that people will read it. They don't have authority to determine, this kind of wording or phrasing will be if it's biased, because it can't involve compromise. But we do want to involve the other denominations because we want them using it. Whether or not we disagree with some of their points of theology, the main point is that we're dealing with the Bible, and we want everybody to have it, even if we disagree with them on certain things. The disagreements can be addressed in another context. But in this situation, we can work together on something like this because in this context, it won't affect our witness and it won't cause compromise. If it caused compromise, then we would disband. Okay, so, I'll give you another example. Would you go do a mission trip with a Mormon? No, why not? Yeah, different beliefs, but to what extent? Because, yeah. So they have a different understanding of the gospel, right? And that's huge. And that's why I make it. But what if you went and you did some evangelism with somebody who's a Paedo Baptist? Means they believe in baptizing children. But if the purpose of the mission is communicating the gospel, and you still have the same views of understanding God, us, how we're saved, Christ's atonement, commitment to the church, discipled, all those kinds of things, unless you're evangelizing babies, I don't think the issue is going to come up. But it could come up. But that's one of those things that you kind of have to address and do, like Michael's talked about, that Al Mohler talks about, kind of a triage, assessing how severe is this theological difference between us. Will it compromise my beliefs? Will it compromise my witness? Will it compromise the mission and why we're cooperating? And so those things need to be considered. Okay, quick questions. See if I taught properly. I'm sure you're all listening well and everything. What is the basis for our unity? Good. Yeah. Okay. And what are we cooperating for? You're a cheater. Okay, now when should we not cooperate with other denominations? That's right. So if it violates your conscience or your loyalty to Christ, that's what it says in the statement, but I'd also add if it compromises the gospel. And I think that falls under the umbrella of loyalty to Christ. But if it compromises the truth of the gospel, then I don't think cooperation should happen. In terms of cooperating for mission, now other issues, you can debate that another time. But any other thoughts, questions, comments?